here's what it's talking about. Now it's referring back to these grounded men who were jealous of the angel's flight and wanted to study like how scientifically valid are these myths. I mean, there's this sense of like this modern historicity that goes back and looks at things, and it's like it questions if anything really existed or not, or it thinks that historically we can know if things existed. Never mind the fact that they had a massive impact on the world for the people at that time. They're like, well, can we, we got to find this person's birth certificate to know they were real, or this kind of modern view. But it has this, they try to pin everything down, and things like myth become arbitrary or superstition. And I think again, my expression is no good myth is merely a myth.
Yeah.
We couldn't fight them in the end. Once we saw the heavens through their modern lens. Oh, how can we atone for the secrets we were shown? Like a basilisk, they fixed our spirits hard as stone.
Okay, so there's the modern lenses. I'm referring to really, in a sense, kind of what we found through microscopes and telescopes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
These are cool things we have access to and it's fun to learn about. But at the same time, we don't really see things like that. We can't really see that far. And the things we see through a telescope, we're not next to, in proximity to, like we just because we can describe them, it doesn't bring us closer or farther. And then also the idea that what we see in microscopes, this incredible world of detail, of so many infinite, indescribable details at the bottom of reality. I think there's something about this where we haven't figured out how to integrate this information completely yet, and it's creating a kind of madness.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I'm talking about when I say that?
It's definitely created kind of madness, because there's a sense in which it's deeply alienating. It's deeply alienating in a very technical way. That is, we have a level of experience of the world, and that level of experience, is there in us, and it's been there from the beginning of human existence. And then all of a sudden we have these telescopes and these microscopes, and then we project ourselves outside of that perception, because we can't see molecules and atoms. Then all of a sudden we project ourselves outside. We see these molecules and atoms through technological innovation, through technological lens, which wouldn't be that big of a deal if on top of that there are people who are telling us that that's the real thing. Like that's right. The real level. The real level is this level of alienation, this alienated level of reality in which you look at the details of things, but you don't see how they cohere into higher identities. And the same with the way that we look at these faraway galaxies. Now it's the opposite, where it's like we're looking at things that are so big and so huge beyond our human scale. Mm-hmm. That we get lost. And we think that the quantity, like the distances in the heaven and the quantities of galaxies and stars somehow diminishes us. And so the looking down in the atoms diminishes us by reducing us to our constitutive elements. And then looking up in the heavens to these galaxies, these faraway galaxies, diminishes us in the sense that then we become, dust in this infinite universe. And so it's a very alienating thing. But there's also a manner in which that I think that perception is the one which is more illusory, because the experience of the world doesn't go away because you look into a microscope. Right. It's the way that I always maybe try to help people see is that, this type of thinking and this type of describing will get people to say something like, well, it's an illusion that the sun comes up in the morning. Actually, right, the earth is turning on itself and is going around the sun. It's not the sun coming up in the morning, and it's not the world becoming cold during winter. And so you think, okay, yeah, I mean, I get it, but ultimately you still get up when the sun comes up pretty much, or at least it still dictates when you get up, and it still dictates when you go to bed. And it does that pretty much for most of humankind. And so that's still the reality you live in. And it's meaningful to the extent that it's meaningful, right? It's meaningful to the extent that it gives meaning to your life. that it actually manages the way, like when it's cold outside and it's winter, it's meaningful because you have to put a coat on or else you're going to die. If you try to abstract that, you're going to die. If you try to live at night all the time, it's not good for your mental health. And people who've tried that know, right? So there's a reality, like an incarnate, embodied reality, which can bring us back to this experience we have. And this experience we have, that's the world of stories. Like that's the world where the world actually is meaningful. You know, right. And you can personify the sun in a certain manner because the sun is managing your life. It's completely true and completely objective that it's doing that.
Yeah, and it's not arbitrary either. As much as someone might want to say that the description is arbitrary somehow, it's like, no, it's incredibly useful because, you
need to see where you're going or else you're going to bump your head.
Exactly. Well, too, the same thing. If you have a friend who keeps staying up later and later and later every night and getting up later and later, that person is almost every situation descending into chaos in their life. They're starting to spread out into multiplicity. And
forget when it happens to friends, when it happens to me.
Right.
Like I know when I start doing that, it's usually a bad sign. Like it's a bad sign that I'm avoiding some problem, that I'm too taken up by some issue and I just want to kind of flee. And so I end up staying up late and I don't want to go to bed. And so, it's always a bad sign.
No, that's good. So I moved on in the song to eventually says this, alas
the muses through their glasses drift away as only madness drowning in the den of our animal skins. Enchante.
Now, like the word din in English is a short word, and but a lot of people don't know what it means. But like din is just like constant noise. It's like, if you ever go to a casino and you hear all the slot machines going at the same time, or a carnival and you hear all the noise where you can't really discern one from the other. That's what a din is. So this is like this is actually, I think there's a lot more like older, deeper philosophical content in this short little pre-chorus. What are you picking up on here?
Well, for sure, I like the idea of you include the idea of technology, which is that the muses are these spiritual beings, these spiritual influences, you could say, that come down upon us through technology. Kind of they get lost because technology kind of creates that alienation that we're talking about. Like it tends to alienate us from our original or more primordial experience. Especially if it's glasses, because say a hammer is a technology which is useful for hitting nails, but the idea of glasses, it's the idea that it's like technology which actually frames your perception, and that's where things become problematic. We know it, right? Because like we live in our phones and we live in these technical spaces, and we realize that it's part of our alienation. It's part of our loneliness and our despair is that we wear these glasses, we wear these technical glasses, and we engage with each other completely. We're doing it now, right? But it's taken over our horizon of experience, you could say. And so then it leads us into a kind of madness.
Okay, so the only thing left in education that they believed was like could be objective or universally understood is sort of these scientific truths. The problem is they didn't leave it there. They picked up and started, because they have to get back into the narrative world. The narrative world that really science doesn't have any ability to judge, doesn't have any, it doesn't have a single tool to to interact with or interface with or evaluate the narrative world. In fact, evaluating what makes a story good or bad is actually a very difficult art to try to be objective about it. So the part of the problem is that, there's this science we live in where people build computers and they're amazing at it and they work so well all of the time, like so consistently. The power is always on in our house most of the time. Like we're this applied version of science, which is much like, it's more of an art than it is really like a scientific discipline in the sense. But where they've created this technology that's incredibly reliable and it's always better. The new thing always seems to be a little bit better and a little bit more powerful than the previous thing. Right. So I think that, so there's this scene in What About Bob? Have you seen that movie?
Yeah,
where,
long time
Bob
ago.
Accidentally teaches the kid to dive, and the father's like, "I'll take it from here. I'll take it from here." And I feel like the narrative side of science jumped in and piggybacked on this applied version of science that's so powerful. And they start to tell theoretical ideas that really don't have a very long shelf life. I mean, they rotate very quickly and they change very quickly. And we're supposed to sort of treat those as like objective narrative worldview facts. And almost all of these stories or versions of them are entirely depersonifying and destructive if you actually believe them. Like, it doesn't make you happier, doesn't allow you to interact in the world any better. And
no, but that's such a good insight. Like the biggest thing, like the easiest one to understand is right, the idea that we're apes. Yeah. And so it's like human beings are apes. And people say that all the time. They're constantly saying that human beings are apes. And it's like, whether or not that's technically true, like in terms of some biological process that there's some relationship biological with these apes. You sure it's a good idea to frame yourself as an ape?
That's what I say whenever I see something beautiful, or like we were at an opera and there was ballet and singing, and it was stunning, and the orchestra and the sun, it was in Santa Fe and the sun was setting in the canyons behind it. And I was like, check out those hairless apes up there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, just funny that people would do that. And when they do it, I think there's like a deep nihilism that people don't realize just how deep it is that they're expressing. Because it's like you could compare yourself to the darkest, like you could do that all the time, right? You could look at anything and always compare it to the darkest aspect of that thing, or you could compare it to the higher aspect of it. And then you have to choose what you're doing, because which way do you want to go? Because if you keep comparing yourself to apes, then that's pretty much the direction you're going to move in. But if you compare yourself to the gods, and then you're going to move in that direction as well. Or there's a reason why the ancient people had these ideals, these gods that were ideals that they were moving towards. It's like, better compare yourself to that rather than compare yourself to the apes. I don't know.
Well, even in more modern history, we had the saints, these people that put what was right ahead of their own flesh and body, like that. And that in every way were like exemplars of like not compromising the good. Or
but it's even simpler than that. It's like, if you're playing basketball, you want to compare yourself to Michael Jordan, not to apes.
Right.
But if you're doing anything, you want to compare yourself to the highest point of it, not like the body, like the most, like let's say the more animal version of it. Like, why would you do that? It's really not useful for anything at all.
Well, and also to not think of yourself as an ape doesn't mean you can no longer access scientific information about the past or about biology. It's
of course not. It's just like have it in its proper place, right?
No, so I think there's something darker behind it all. Like, I don't want to get into, but I think there's something darker behind this tendency to spread this sort of like depersonifying. Like, I don't know. It's like going up to a kid after they just had a great experience on Santa Claus's lap, and then just like, this guy is just a guy in a costume. He's not really Santa. Like, get over it, kid. Buck up and face the world. And it's like, you did that kid no good. Like, you just made them cynical like you, and now they want to maybe go and rob that from other people too, because they were hurt. So there's something about this theoretical world, though, like where, so it snuck in. They snuck in like a religious narrative about origin. They snuck in a worldview. Like, they weren't. I don't know if anybody was specifically trying to sneak it in, but that once you cut out, let's say, religion out of education, now, now there's a huge gap. It's the narrative side of everything, the story that unites things and tells us what's really going on and why. And it had to fill in with something.
But it's a super trick. Like, if people want to know, it's a very easy trick, and I can reveal the trick to you, and then you won't get tricked by the magicians anymore. The trick is very simple. All you do is you look at something that has unity, and then you describe it through its elements, constitutive elements. And then people think that's it. Like, that's the only trick. And you don't even have to describe it at the lowest element. You just have to describe it as just one level lower than the one that provides unity. It's like, I don't know, you have a beautiful sculpture and you're like, just a bunch of cut marble.
Right.
It's like, that's all you need to do. You don't have to talk about the molecules or the chemical composition. You just have to go one step lower than the step where you actually perceive meaning. And it's like it's a bad habit people have when they do that. But then you realize that usually even the steps below, right? Those also end up having meaning. But if you can just bring it a little lower, like just keep bringing it down, then you can be cynical about anything and everything that exists in the world. You just have to bring it to its constitutive elements.
But there's a scientism out there. It's like we've gotten used to the fact that these stories they tell us have a short shelf life. I mean, like in my lifetime, dinosaurs look entirely different now. Like, I think dinosaurs are awesome. I love learning about it, but like, is that going to be different when my kids are my age? Absolutely. And so we can't treat what we have as fact. And it's kind of spread that way. So, and it has to be because the narrative.
Yeah, so it's better to talk about dragons, because dragons have been way more stable than dinosaurs in the past, like few generations.
Yeah.
Dragons are way more real. Like, at least you know what a dragon is. A dinosaur, it's like all of a sudden they have feathers and they don't have feathers. They have hair. They don't have hair. Who knows? Keeps changing.
Dragons all the time too. There are forces of chaos that are so much bigger than you that you can't even confront or really make a dent in. Yeah. And there are internal dragons where let's just say there might be something of value I'm protecting out of fear, and the fear itself is the dragon guarding that treasure. Like, there's these tiny internal dragons and these massive dragons, and there's actually a dragon between every category. And it's like it's one of those things, like, you see dragons everywhere, and dragons are useful, and dinosaurs are cool. They're like animals that don't exist anymore. But one actually helps us understand ourselves, and the other one, it's like, hey, we found these bones. Let's tell a story about them. I don't think that like this sort of scientific narrative can at all even come close to what a good myth can do for you connecting in love and beauty to the world around you. Yeah. But I think that also, so one of the things I was going to say is, like, so when people hear someone talk, like, or someone like me who's like deeply religious, like, I have a spiritual life, I have a worldview that's, you might think is ridiculous if I shared it with you, right? But it doesn't cut off my access to any of, like, chemistry information, biology, physics. Like, all of these things are accessible, except that I am hospitable to the other side of the coin, which science, because if you just trust science, if you're just into scientism, you can't even discuss what's on the other side of the coin. I think one of the best narrative examples of this that was written in a story, and I think it was done accidentally, but it's kind of perfect, is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I don't have to give a spoiler alert for a almost 40-year-old movie. So, but there's this coin, literally talk about two sides of a coin. There's the coin in the movie. And on this coin, it's like, it tells you the location of the Ark of the Covenant, which is like the center, the reason for the universe. If you look at what it means, and inside is the logos, the reason for everything. So they, there's this battle for the coin, and the German guy, that evil Nazi, gets it burnt in one side of the coin, burnt in his hand. And they're looking to take the Ark, the universe, to extract the power from it. They don't care about the authority or the religious narrative to it. They don't care anything about that. And he has this one side of the coin. And so, but he doesn't know there's another side of the coin. So he ends up digging in the wrong place and not finding the Ark, right? You can't find the Ark if you only have one side of the coin. Now, Indiana Jones, actually, Pascal's wager is tucked into the story, because Indiana Jones early on is like, his friend, I think it's Brody is his name, is warning him about, like, how dangerous the Ark could be. And he's like, listen, go for that stuff. But you know what? You know me, I play it safe. And so there's like Pascal's wagers in there. Like, it shows a gun as a representation of that. But Indiana Jones has both sides of the coin. He leaves room for this narrative reason for the universe, this purposeful reason. And it's not just a thing we extract power from. And he actually finds the proper Ark. And in the end, he survives because he has reverence for the thing, and he closes his eyes while the Nazis stare right at the angel of the Lord and get their faces melted like wax. Yeah. I think that's a perfect example, because Indiana Jones, like, he's a scientist. He has access to all of these things, but he's actually a true scientist in the sense that he doesn't stop the scientific method on just material things. He also has to leave things. He has to leave room for that hospitality to the other side of things. So
he contains the narrative. Like, he cares enough about the narrative aspect that his face won't melt when he reaches into that power. And it's like, people think that that's just a story, but I would say most people probably today regret, the creation of nuclear weapons. And like, the creation of nuclear weapons is exactly an example of handling a scientific fact without enough attention to the narrative the narrative reality of that scientific fact. It's like, it's not just about splitting a stupid atom, right? It's about the capacity that humans can have to destroy the world. And so the narrative frame of facts is, if you're not attentive to that, that, and you can see it like the environmentalist narrative right now is exactly that. That's what they're saying. They're saying you need to pay attention to the narrative consequence of certain facts in the world and certain chemicals or certain things. And so it's always there, even if for people, even the most scientific, atheistic person will somewhere, if you pay attention to them for a little while, will nonetheless be engaging in storytelling and will have some very deep attachment to a narrative aspect of reality that they can't get rid of.
Right. Well, that always comes first. Like you said, like in art, Jules Verne is talking about flying to the moon and these submarines, 20,000 Leagues to the Sea, well before these things existed. And the idea is like, did they exist because the artist dreamed of it first? It's like, it always has to be an idea first. Things always begin with purpose. And in fact, like anything that comes into existence, anything that begins to exist, exists for a purpose. Like I can't, one of the epistemological tests is like, I could say to you, you don't think things have purpose? As far as you know, scientifically, you can test this, create something new. Okay, so Jonathan, create something without a purpose. Okay, it can't, automatically done. It's inexorable. There's purpose in it. Even if you don't want the purpose to be obvious to someone else who finds the object later, you have, because I've initiated this challenge and the object begins to exist, it exists for a purpose. And so
but even if it's just to prove that I can do it, it's already a purpose. Like,
so the problem is
that I can do something without purpose.
So like the what's left in the public discussion with this sort of scientism kind of view is like, you can't think of it that way. And it's like, well, all right, like what's going to happen to us if we don't? It's like, oh, it doesn't matter that you were here. You didn't exist. You weren't worried about your parents before you were born. You're not going to be worried about the world after you're gone. It's like, okay, here we are struggling, and people are trying to find some sense of peace and joy, and they can't get their footing anywhere because nothing is really real except for like stuff, matter.
All right, that's it for part 3 of our video where Jonathan and I are talking about the story behind Enchante in this series called The Myth Behind the Music. We're going to be having more guests in the future, and Jonathan and I have a few more episodes where we're talking about Enchante. So I hope you tune in for that. You can follow Jonathan. I put a link in the description to his YouTube channel, The Symbolic World, and you should be able to find that and follow him there. Now, please, as always, like, subscribe, comment. It helps us out and also helps you find our videos in the future. Outside of that, if you want to follow us anywhere online, you can go to dirtpoorrobins.com and find our Facebook link, Twitter, Instagram, all of the things. Our merchandise, we have t-shirts, we have records, we have vinyl for sale. Check it out, please, and thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.